Thanks to the wonders of technology, it's incredibly easy to be a musician who's also a huge sports fan. You're on the road, you've got tour dates, no big deal. You've got your phone, you can stream. But what if you're a musician and a sports fan in 1989 and you're part of an influential scene in Chapel Hill? You've got incredible basketball being played on campus while you're doing a show at the Cat's Cradle? Well, that was the case for McCaughan, co-founder of the iconic independent rock band Superchunk, and the co-founder of Merge Records, the incredibly successful independent music label that I'm guessing at some point in time has put out a record by a band you like. So what did Mac do while he was trying to keep up with college basketball? I mean, look, not every venue is luxurious. So he's just hoping there's a functioning TV somewhere.
The Triangle has the most unique landscape for sports. 3 major universities along Tobacco Road with rabid fan bases, a Stanley Cup champion, an NFL team right down the road, and heavily invested transplants. Not to mention an interesting mix of sports teams that were. Joe Ovius brings you a brief history of Triangle sports, a candid conversation with those who help shape why sports matters here.
I know you're associated with the DIY scene, punk and everything else, but I do feel the most punk thing you've ever done was become a Duke fan.
Well, when my family moved here in 81, we moved to Durham. My parents both went to Duke.
Mm-hmm.
They met, they're both from South Florida, but they both went to Duke, and they met on the train on the way home for vacation one time. So they spent a lot of time in Durham. My mom taught Spanish in Durham public schools. But I grew up in South Florida. When we moved here, I had no concept really of what college sports meant. We would go to Miami Dolphins games, et cetera, and when we lived in South Florida, Yankees spring training, that kind of thing. But nobody cared that much about any of that. And so when we moved here, I didn't really know what it meant. And early on in my first year at Githens junior high, I wore a Duke pin on my sweatshirt. And a guy named Brent, of course his name was Brent, just walked, I didn't know him, sweatshirt, and bent it in half and handed it back to me. And I was like, oh, that's a Carolina fan. My image of a Carolina fan is cemented in my brain. And so, I just figured, hey, we live in Durham, like this is where Duke is. But no, it was still the counterculture, oddly enough, thing to be a Duke fan, because there were way more Carolina and State fans.
Carolina was establishment, man.
Oh my God. And Carolina was incredible at basketball, and so was NC State, and Duke was incredibly not good at basketball in 1981. I mean, I knew that they had been good, but and the reason we moved to North Carolina was because my dad got a job at Duke, and so we got a pair of season tickets that we still have. They have never moved. They've never gotten any better. They're kind of up in the corner. There's never an opportunity like, hey, you want to get a little closer? No, it's like, okay, those are yours. You can buy those every year if you want or not. And those first few years, it was just literally like, oh my God, like Carolina had Michael Jordan, NC State's winning a championship, and Duke was just really like the odd man out of those years. So, post Johnny Dawkins, when Duke kind of became consistently good, it always still felt, even when they were winning championships, it always still felt like they were the underdog to me. Of course, if you live somewhere else in the country and you only started paying attention when they were winning championships, you feel like, oh, they're always good.
Yeah, if you look at 91, 92, when they win the back-to-back, followed by 2001, and the loaded teams that they had, nationally, they are an institution. They are the establishment, and people want to hate on Duke. But you've lived here for a very long time, and I've been doing sports talk radio for a very long time locally. They are not a local team, and it's really hard to explain that to people. Like, it's State, it's Carolina, even like a little cadre of Wake Forest fans, Duke is not in any way, shape, or form like the liked team at all.
No.
So it's very anti-establishment of you. It's the irony of the nationally established program and Coach K and the corporate nature of it all is a little still counterculture here in the Triangle.
Yeah, and because of course by the time we moved here, Dean was the establishment.
Yeah,
I mean he was the man. He is the man. But that was it's hard to imagine now if you're Coach K. A coach like Coach K losing that many games in your first few years and keeping someone just allowing you to keep your job in college basketball. I don't know if that would still happen now.
No, it wouldn't.
But Tom Butters or whoever's job it was looks really smart.
Yeah, in the end, it does look very, very smart. So you start to play music. You're in a handful of different projects at this time in the mid-'80s, right? Before Superchunk was properly established in 1989.
Yeah, I was in bands in high school, and then I went to college in New York, but came back, took a year off, was in some bands then. We put some records out, a box set of records with local bands, Wax, Slush Puppies, Egg, Black Girls, and Angels of Epistemology. And then pretty soon after that, we started Merge, the label, and Chunk, the band, at the same time.
You're probably playing a lot of shows at the Cradle at this time, the old Cradle on Franklin Street.
Yeah.
There's got to be a weird kind of balance of, I've seen Franklin Street on a game day. It's kind of like what you talked about earlier, guys named Brent. You got you got guys in polos and fish belts and that kind of stuff. But then you also have this place like the Cat's Cradle where all these bands have come through, independent bands, punk bands. I've seen so many shows at the Cradle. Did you kind of at the time see that weird balance of what Franklin Street was on a game day versus what Franklin Street also kind of became in the late 80s, early 90s in terms of the music scene?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of like jock culture is what punk was against. Machismo, of course there's machismo in punk and other kinds of music, but I just mean like sports is the culture. So if you're in a music scene that's counterculture, there's bound to be a tension there.
Yes.
But I also grew up with people who we all listened to the same kind of like alternative music and punk rock, but we were also really into watching basketball. So that there was that group of people, and once we got into bands and Chapel Hill music scene per se, there was that same group of people, the guys in the band Polvo, huge basketball fans. Even when we first started Chunk, Chuck Garrison, our drummer, huge UNC fan, just grew up that way.
Okay.
And so that sports music combo was always around, and Frank Heath, who owns the Cat's Cradle, is a huge basketball person. Now, I don't remember a TV in the original Cat's Cradle. Maybe there was one in the small Cat's Cradle on Franklin Street.
Yeah, I don't recall a television in the
Which is kind of
Cradle at all.
bold
Yeah.
to have a bar
Yeah.
of any kind in Chapel Hill without a TV for people to watch basketball.
Yeah.
And that's kind of bold. Now, maybe they brought one in for tournament games or something I just don't remember.
For those who don't know, Frank is a huge Carolina basketball fan. So they're having. I actually went to Setlist FM to see if certain shows matched up with certain important dates in Carolina basketball history. And that kind of ties into your own fandom too. Because as of this recording, we're a couple of days away from the Duke-Carolina game at Cameron Indoor Stadium. This is Mike Krzyzewski's last regular season game at Cameron against UNC. You've just released a new album, Wild Loneliness. You're supposed to start a tour.
Now, I'm not saying that we moved our tour dates so I could go to the Duke-Carolina game this year, but it is a silver lining of us moving our tour dates. But
which kind of gets to like a larger conversation. You're on the road a lot in the early 90s, right?
A lot. Yeah, probably like half the year.
Half the year. You're just getting started. And I went and looked. In 91, Duke wins a championship. 92, Duke wins a championship. I don't know if you remember this or not, but like your shows were the nights before the Final Four games.
Right. Well, one of my favorite stories about watching basketball on the road, and it's much easier now to find a basketball game,
sure,
no matter what town you're in, and there's so many channels that it might be on that
it's on your phone.
Even if you're in some other part of the world, you can probably find it to watch. It's on your phone, exactly. But in 1991, we were doing our first cross-country tour, and we were playing in Houston at a club called Fitzgerald's. We were opening for Firehose, who are huge heroes of ours, Mike Watt, George Hurley, who were in the Minutemen, Ed from Ohio. This is their new band. And this was a big gig for us to be able to open for them. We opened 3 shows for them in Texas. And this is the night of not the final game, but the final 4 when Duke beat UNLV and UNC lost, I think, to Kansas. And so the UNC Kansas game we watched at the Mexican restaurant next door to Fitzgerald. Chuck was bummed, of course, because UNC got beat. And then we were on stage during the end of the Duke UNLV game. And so I couldn't watch it. We're playing a show. I look over to the side of the stage, and Mike Watt, the bass player for Firehose, is screaming something at me. And I can't tell what it is. And when we finished whatever song we're playing, I go over to him, and he's screaming, Duke won, because that was a huge upset for them to beat, I think, Larry Johnson's UNLV team. So that was hilarious. And then, you realize, like, oh, there's other people in this music thing that also are passionate about basketball. Mike Watt, actually a big Carolina fan by way of being a big Lakers fan.
Okay. Mitch Kupchak.
He had James Worthy sign his bass. So like he had this connection to college basketball via his fandom of the Lakers. But yeah, so we would just find ways to watch when we could, but we were really not thinking about trying to schedule anything around anything, because it's just kind of like, well, we're playing gigs.
Yeah, you're playing gigs at that point. Because like we were talking about, it's really easy to keep up with things now. You got Twitter, you've got the apps, you got the notifications, everything else. And yeah, it's not like TVs were readily available everywhere like they are now too. So I was always curious how you kind of kept up with those things when you were on the road. I
remember feeling very lucky when you would run into a situation where you're like, oh my God, this club has like a television that works. And I remember I played drums for a band called Seam that was based here in Chapel Hill. It was a trio, and we were doing a short tour. We didn't tour that much, but we were doing a short tour. We were playing in Princeton at what they call eating clubs there. They're basically like fraternities. And this eating club had like a giant television. This is amazing. And I watched Leitner's last second shot to beat Kentucky with Sue Young and Lexi, who were big Carolina fans. In fact, the band Seam, we had a song called King Rice.
Okay.
So that's where their loyalties lay. But I remember sitting in this empty fraternity house watching this insane ending of this basketball game. So you do remember where you are when you see certain things like that.
Sure. It's the old Woody Durham, go where you go and do what you do in terms of being lucky. You didn't have that opportunity. You're just on the road trying to watch these things when you could. Have you been surprised by a former Duke player, former Carolina player, or really any athlete that knows Merge, has been at shows, anything like that?
Yeah, it's always surprising when there's a weird crossover of worlds like that, I think, because, if you're playing college sports of any kind, that's got to be your whole life. Like, how do you have time to pay attention to anything else,
Sure.
much less go to shows or whatever. But, Cherokee Parks, who played for Duke, was really into punk rock and really into music. I've seen him at shows by the band Pipe. And we put out some records of theirs on Merge, awesome local band. So Cherokee's someone that I saw engage with the music scene. Eric Montross has been a huge supporter of a cause called Be Loud Sophie that has a big concert at the Cat's Cradle every year to raise money for Be Loud. And he's watching the bands, he's introducing the bands, he's, the MC of the event sometimes. So, there's definitely been some crossover and probably, of course, things that I don't even know about. But I'm sure that anyone who's playing college basketball has their hands full with whatever coach wants them to do.
They got to be college kids still, You
Yeah.
never know where they might show up.
That's true.
Do you know if a Krzyzewski ever showed up to a show?
I'm pretty sure they have not, but I don't know.
Have you actually had any interaction with Coach K? As big of a Duke fan as you are, and as established you are in Durham.
I made the music for an ESPN Sunday morning commercial.
Okay.
And my assignment was to record something that kind of sounded like the Velvet Underground song Sunday Morning, because it was for this Sunday morning ESPN thing. Coach K is in the ad kind of washing his face. And a friend of mine, the reason I got that gig, a friend of mine was the director of the ad and worked on the ad. And he got this poster signed from me from Coach K that says, "It's great being from Durham. Best of luck, Mike Krzyzewski."
So that's it.
That's it. That's my interaction with Coach K.
Okay.
I've been at a couple of press conferences and things like that, but never have a conversation with him or anything.
One quick note about the Cat's Cradle, because as we're recording this, I know you've been emailing with Frank over at the Cat's Cradle. I went back and I looked for important Carolina basketball dates. 1993 national championship over Michigan. That's kind of a big deal. I went back and I looked at the shows that were being played at the Cradle in 1993, and lo and behold, Mudhoney in 1993. That's a huge
packed Cradle.
Freaking show. That's a packed show. Do we know what Frank was doing that night?
Frank says that they had a TV in the lobby.
Okay.
And that not that many people were watching it because they were watching the show. But I do remember the night of a Carolina game, and I feel like it was during the Coach Gutt era. And I feel like it was a tournament game, but not the championship. When Yola Tango was playing at the Cat's Cradle, and the band said, we don't want a game on back there because everyone's going to be standing back there paying attention to that.
Yeah.
And Yola Tango are huge basketball fans.
Okay.
Huge sports fans. They said, but we'll have a TV on stage and we'll have it facing us, and then we'll keep you updated on what the score is. So that was their compromise, which is pretty great.
Get here and you're a basketball fan and you kind of immerse yourself in college sports, but you're also a huge Carolina Hurricanes fan too.
Oh, yeah.
So how did you get in? Again, you and I are simpatico when it comes to growing up in South Florida and these concepts of sports being foreign to us. There was no hockey in the 70s and the 80s. The Florida Panthers didn't get going until the 90s. Hurricanes moved here in 1997, and it was cool to check them out. So how did you get into the Canes?
Well, growing up in South Florida, you're right, there was no hockey teams, but there was a lot of ice skating. I don't know if you did this in Miami or not, but we would go
in Boca Raton.
Ice skating.
I want to say there was an ice skating rink that I would go to as a kid from time to time. It wasn't in Boca, but I want to say it was probably closer to like Pompano Beach or something like that. But anyway.
We would go somewhere, I feel like it was like a Miami Sportsplex or something, and there's a lot of people from up north that live in Miami and live in South Florida.
Yes.
And I guess they wanted to go ice skating. And so we would go ice skating. And I feel like for so many people, including myself, the 1980 Winter Olympics put hockey in my brain forever.
Yeah, because the USA national team beating Russia.
Yeah. And then the other thing that coincided with was ESPN arriving on our brand new cable box, the first cable box we ever had. And NHL was a sport that they actually had a contract with. So you could watch like Australian rules football late at night, or you could just watch hockey all the time. And so I started watching hockey, even though I didn't really have like a team I followed. It was like, I can watch sports whenever, not just on Sundays or whatever. Like I'm watching it, you know. That was like cable TV was the thing. So I was into watching hockey. And then when we moved here, I didn't really, I just kept watching it on TV, I guess, but didn't really have a team or anything. And then the Raleigh Ice Caps, I think, were a way that a lot of people around here got into hockey, and we would go to those games. In fact, I have friends who were angry when the Canes came because they made the Ice Caps leave.
For those who have no recollection of the Ice Caps, those were, I guess the best way I can describe it is, it's like going to a Durham Bulls game in that you're going for the beer, you're going for the atmosphere. You might not necessarily be going to watch actual hockey. And then fights would break out, and then people would have fun with that, right?
Sure. So and it's in Dorton Arena, which is a classic old building.
Yeah, it's the setting is great. I've made the argument that NC State should revamp Dorton Arena and have their club hockey team elevated to D1, and people would show up to that sort of thing.
They would.
So when you're going, I guess you're going to Ice Caps games just because it was a nice cheap night out.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah,
fun to see live hockey. So then when the Canes game, I mean, I had friends that started going to games in Greensboro, and I didn't do that. But when they came over to Raleigh, started going to games, and then started going to those playoff games in their first playoff run. When you could just drive over and literally buy a ticket to see them play the Canadians or the Maple Leafs day of the game. And there's all these people driving down from Canada going, we can't get tickets to games in Canada, but we can come down here and see.
It was cheaper to drive or fly down to North Carolina to watch the Maple Leafs play.
And so that's 02?
Yeah, 02 was the first Stanley Cup run,
right,
where they lose to Detroit.
And so after that season, I had season tickets until couple years ago, and I realized that the only way that we were going to make the playoffs again is if I gave up my season ticket. So I gave up my season tickets, and then we made the playoffs. No, I love watching the Hurricanes, and I feel like there's maybe one of the coolest things that has happened to me in the intersection of sports and hockey. A couple things. When the Canes won the Cup, I had season tickets that year and went to every playoff game, including Game 7. Incredible night, of course. And then a friend of mine, who I only know because he's into music, who worked for the NHL, said a few days later, said, "Hey, we're over here at the arena." What was it called then? It wasn't PNC.
It was the RBC Center.
We're over here at the RBC Center. It's the middle of the afternoon on like a weekday.
Sure.
We're over here at the RBC Center, and we're taping this program for Canadian TV, maybe TSN or something like that, where we watch Game 7 with a couple of the players, and we want someone else to be watching it with them who's not a player. Do you want to come do this?
They just need random fans to hang out?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, just one.
Oh, just one?
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I drive over there, and the day ends up being me, Rod Brindamore, Cam Ward, watching Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, and these guys are just talking about it. And occasionally they'd ask me to chime in about the game. They're like, what were you thinking at this point in the game? Like that kind of thing. I was like, we're still standing up. I don't know. We just stood up the whole night.
So do these guys know who you are? Or they just assume you're just like a random fan? What's the introduction there?
I think the introduction is, this is like a local musician who's a season ticket holder who was at the game.
Sure.
And boom.
Okay.
And now I will say that, we put out records by the band Arcade Fire, Canadian band, on our label. And Cam Ward, I know, was an Arcade Fire fan.
Okay.
So there was a slight like music thing happening with Cam and probably some other players.
Cam's spectrum of music was wild too. Into Arcade Fire, but also Nickelback. Huge Nickelback guy.
Right.
So anyway.
I thought that was like a baseline assumption about most NHL players.
No, actually, no. That's actually changed over time, because you go to the locker room enough times, you'll hear the changeover in how music is now listened to, right? So like in 2006, when I'm covering the Stanley Cup run, Bruce Springsteen's The Rising was a big It was part of the pregame.
Yep.
All the lead up and the graphics.
That's
and everything
right.
else.
That's right.
But you know what song actually really got them motivated?
What's that?
Coldplay's "Fix You."
Really?
I've actually talked to Eric Cole about that because I will never forget. Like one time we were in there like pregame stuff or whatever, doing interviews. And, they got their playlist, they're getting their hyped up, and then "Fix You" comes on. I'm like, this is not something that I assumed. He goes, it was the lead, how it ends. It's the slow build up, and then the drums come in and the guitars come in. They just they would get pumped up to that. But that's that's not something I would associate with pump up music. But pump up music is different for everybody.
Right. Well, and then another really cool thing is that they have played Superchunk songs over the PA during Canes games.
I thought that stopped. I thought you ticked somebody off. I was going to get to that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe they stopped. But
I thought you made somebody mad in a Luke DeCock News and Observer article by talking about how the arena music sucked.
Oh.
And they banned you. The guy said he'd stop playing you.
Oh, my God. Well, see, I feel like they played it after that.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
All right.
I don't have season tickets anymore, so I don't go to as many games. So I could be wrong. But I remember being in a game one night, and the person I was at the game with, my friend Allison, who we had season tickets together, she's like elbowing me, like pointing up. I'm like, what? Like I can't. It's just like a blur to me. You know what I'm saying? And she's like, they're playing Superchunk, and I think they're playing the song "Punch Me Harder."
Okay.
Maybe there was a fight happening. I don't know.
That
It'd
would
be good
make
fight
sense.
music.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But anyway, that was really
trying to think of another
cool.
one that would make sense. Or like one of your more popular one. Was it Throwing Things?
Throwing Things.
That might be
Hyper
one.
Enough might be a good one. Yeah. I mean, just having your music played over the PA in between Seven Nation Army and I don't know, Don't Stop Believin' or something. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I remember Luke DeCock, who's columnist for the News and Observer and was the beat writer for the Canes there for a long time, wrote an article. I forgot when exactly it was, and you were featured in it, discussing why. I think at the time, if my recollection is correct, they were playing a lot of dub, not like reggae dub. I'm talking about the dubstep stuff, like with the bass dropping and all of this stuff to make the speakers just like make it feel you like you could feel it in your chest, right? And that kind of stuff gives me anxiety, I like electronic music, but when it's that loud, it's an overstimulation. And I think that was kind of the complaint at the time. Like, why is it so loud? Why is it this bass drop music? And it spoke to a larger issue about why arena music in general sucks.
It just feels like one person playlisted it like 10 years ago, and then it just never.
Yeah.
And then it never changed, or 20 years. I mean, like it's just very generic, and I feel like it would be really cool if. Maybe some teams have this, but it'd be really cool if you felt like, oh, it's different because I'm in this arena.
Yeah.
Versus what they're playing, in Pittsburgh or in Montreal or whatever.
Well, each team has its own goal music. The Carolina Hurricanes would play Blur's Song 2 for the longest time.
Yeah.
And they recently switched it over to P.D. Pablo's Raise Up, which I think is
great.
Awesome. I love that they do that now. I forgot what team it was, but I remember I was watching a game on a national broadcast, and I heard Pennywise, the Bro Hymn. And I was like, well, this makes sense because if you want everybody to chant along in unison, that's a really good song to do that to. But yeah, there is a lot of Zombie Nation, that kind of stuff. You mentioned Seven Nation Army and everything else. Is it because the normal we forget that the mainstream fan listens to mainstream stuff? Is that what it is?
I guess to me it's not. To me, I guess that's what's annoying is the idea that what's mainstream is like white rock music from the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like P.D. Pablo, that was a huge hit.
Yeah.
Hip hop is like maybe the most popular music in America, but you don't hear that much of that.
You got to go to a football game or a basketball game to hear that now.
Yeah, so I just mean it's like, yes, people listen to mainstream music, but they probably wouldn't mind hearing something that was also good, but that they hadn't heard before, occasionally mixed in with these other things, but also just update it sometimes.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think the issue that I would have too is certain songs actually have been ruined because of sporting events, because you've heard it so many times. White Stripes' Seven Nation Army would be one of those. I mean, I remember when that album came out, I thought Seven Nation Army was amazing. But now if I hear
never need to hear it again.
I never need to hear it again, which is a shame too, because again, I think we forget that it's a really good song. What is it, Alan? I can't listen to Alan Parsons Project without thinking of the Bulls,
right?
Because it's so closely associated. And I mean, I know they did it.
No, like if you play that beginning, if you play that music for so many people, they just be like, "That's the Bulls."
That's
music.
the Bulls music. It's like, no, that's Alan Parsons Project, man. Like a long career. I do wonder if Jack White even has thoughts on the fact that
I'm sure his thoughts are like, hopefully he's making some money from that being played so many times.
There is that. Like what, if I'm trying to think if there's a song. Is there a song that you wouldn't mind getting just crushed into the ground at a sporting event though?
Oh, crush any of our songs into the ground at a sporting event. That would be awesome.
But you've tried to change the game on that though, because I know at the Durham Bulls, again, this is one of those community things where the Durham Bulls and Merge have had these Merge nights where you've crafted the playlist and everything else. So, baseball players are very particular about their walk-up music. So when you've done those types of nights, how have you tried to kind of craft a playlist for what is an audience that might not be familiar with Merge artists?
This is why I say I feel like people are open to stuff that's good. I mean, because when we've had these Merge nights, and it's awesome working with the Bulls, I love the Durham Bulls. Like the walk-up music has been Neutral Milk Hotel, Titus Andronicus, Mount Moriah. Like it's been like stuff on Merge and no one's complaining about it. No one's like, oh, I can't believe they played that instead of Back in Black or whatever, instead of Enter Sandman when that person was walking up to the plate, So I feel like the Bulls is a great example of being able to combine these two things and the community that everyone kind of shares.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to 2006. So you went to every playoff game in 2006?
I'm pretty sure every home playoff game.
How did you manage? Were you not touring that summer?
We just good timing. We weren't on tour.
Okay.
Superchunk, actually, that was
you were in a hiatus at that time.
Superchunk was kind of in a hiatus. We played a couple shows a year. I was putting out solo records, but not touring that much for those. So so it was just like the timing was right for me to just like be around and be able to go to all those games, and it was amazing.
From the perspective of somebody who is a performer, okay, and I've been to a handful of your shows, and I've seen you kind of just get lost in what you're doing. Is there a similarity from, say, you as a performer getting lost in the act itself and maybe watching a basketball player in a zone? Do you think the feeling is the same? Have you talked to players about that kind of thing?
I never really thought of that, and I haven't talked to a player about that, but I feel like in some ways, when you're playing a show, maybe you're playing songs you've played enough times so that you don't have to worry or think about it as much as just kind of like play it and have fun, and jump around and just be into it like you're saying.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's a difference between you playing new songs off your new album versus playing something back in the 90s.
Right.
Okay.
But I feel like if you're on the ice or on the basketball court, like I feel like you must be concentrating all the time about like what is about to happen in the next second in terms of having your head on a swivel or just like being aware of what's going on. In other words, I feel like if you zoned out in the way that we can zone out playing a show, like something bad's going to happen on the court to you or to your team.
There is a focus though, because you're all in time. And if you guys are riffing on something, you do have to pick up on what somebody else is doing.
Right. You are paying attention to what everyone else is doing, but I guess I feel like it's more in like a subconscious way or something. That's a good question. I don't know. It'd be interesting to talk to an athlete about that.
Oh, let me put it in the perspective of you as a spectator then. You go to plenty of shows. whether it's your own acts or you're, as a kid, you're seeing Bowie or something like that. Is the feeling the same of watching Game 7 of the Stanley Cup and the Canes win it all and you're losing it with the crowd and everything else? How is that in comparison to, say, at a show?
I guess at a show that's that great, it's more pure excitement, whereas at a Game 7, it's pure stress until something good happens, and then it's like a great release and the excitement comes.
Yeah.
But that 3 hours until the final, light goes, you're just freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the feeling at the end is kind of similar, I would say.
Okay. I was going to say, I guess nobody goes to a show and is sitting there waiting with anxiety of, are they going to play my favorite song?
No, you're just, if the show is great, you're just enjoying the show.
Okay.
You're just along for the ride. There is a great photograph online you can see back on the basketball and indie rock spectrum where Paulvo was playing a show in Florida. They were on tour, maybe with Small 23 or Pipe. I'm not sure who was opening. But there's a photograph of Shaq. It was his 23rd birthday, and so he happened to be at the same club. And there's guys from Paulvo and Chuck Garrison standing with Shaq on the sidewalk in front of the club, which is just an amazing artifact that exists.
Do you think Shaq knew who Paulvo was?
I don't think so.
Okay, he didn't have their CDs back in the day?
No, but we did talk about Arcade Fire a bit, and when Butler is a huge basketball fan and a really good basketball player. I've played basketball with Arcade Fire and Paulvo. They're both really good at basketball, both those bands. And Wynn has done a lot to bring the music and basketball worlds together with some charity games that he has worked on. He's played in them with NBA players.
Yeah.
And maybe some other musicians, but there's also like musicians at the games and stuff like that.
For those who might not know, Wynn he's a tall dude.
He's tall.
He's a tall guy. He can play some ball, which I guess you spend a lot of time on the road, and you gotta relieve stress somehow, right? You got a lot of downtime.
Well,
would you play hoops on the road with other bands?
Yeah, and when we did Lollapalooza, the year we did it, and other years as well, I know that like basketball, there were some intense basketball games, not the tour we did, but when the Beastie Boys were on Lollapalooza, there's good stories about them playing basketball with some of the other artists that were on that year. Yeah. They just brought a hoop with them and pulled it out from under their bus when they parked at whatever arena they were at, set up the hoop, and then play ball.
Hey, I went to the Final Four in Minneapolis a couple years ago, and I went and did a tour of Paisley Park. Prince's home and studio. And, you watch enough if you get to know enough about Prince, obviously, he's a basketball player, but I think most people understand Prince as a basketball player because of the Dave Chappelle show and the story that was told and the game blouses and pancakes and everything else. So I was hell-bent on finding where the basketball hoop was, but they had started to convert it into the Purple Rain room where they had the motorcycle, they had the suit, they had all
artifacts,
all these artifacts kind of from the movie and the recordings and everything else. And I asked the tour guide at the time, and I said, well, where would they play basketball? And they're like, actually, this was the rehearsal space, because you could see the mirror for the dancers and everything else. But he goes, I'm pretty sure the basketball hoop would be in that corner of this room, and that's where they would play from time to time. And I was like, why didn't you leave it here?
Yeah.
And they were very much like, yeah, we get that question a lot. It's maybe something they would reconsider going forward. And I guess that's where I was going with this. Musicians are competitive too. You want to have a successful tour, you want to have a successful album, you want to have good reviews for your albums. So I was always curious if those kinds of things poured over into backstage, like you said with the Beastie Boys. You play, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't play that much anymore, but
we're all
used
up there
to play
in age
a lot.
Now, yeah.
Yeah.
So who was the most competitive band that you've run across?
Oh, I think Guided by Voices could be very intensely competitive on the basketball court. Pollard's good, and his brother's really good too.
Okay. So Pollard's not only just kind of bringing the angst on the records, he's also doing this on the court too.
I think so, and like I said, Paulvo, Ash, and Dave, and Steve, really good ball players. I think that there's more bands than you think.
Do you remember the first NHL game you went to?
I think the first actual NHL game in an arena that I went to was when we were on tour, and we were playing some towns in Canada that we don't normally play because they're hard to get to, or they just take an extra week add an extra week onto your tour. We played a tour where we did Vancouver, Saskatoon, Calgary, Winnipeg.
Oh, geez.
And maybe London, Ontario, in addition to Toronto and Montreal. But the show we were playing in Calgary was very late. Like, we weren't going on stage until midnight or something. And there was a Flames game in town that night. And one of the guys working the show was like, "Hey, I know you're a hockey fan. You want to go to a game tonight?" I was like,
"Sure."
There's time? Sure. We don't play for 6 hours? Yeah, let's go. So we went to a Flames game, and so that was
that's the old Saddle Dome too, right?
Yeah. It was awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So man, the Saddle Dome. So you've been in some great venues.
Yeah, it's fun going to see other people's places where they get hyped up about seeing their sports,
Basketball arena as a concert venue. Have you played in any?
I've seen some shows at Cameron.
How is Cameron as a venue?
Well,
for music.
When we were in high school, they would get some good shows. So I saw, like, one of the loudest shows I ever saw was the Go-Go's with Flock of Seagulls opening for them.
Oh, wow.
At Cameron.
Okay.
Incredibly loud. Great show.
All right.
Saw Neil Young there. I know Elvis Costello played there. I didn't get to go. Saw Echo and the Bunnymen there. So Cameron has had a lot of really good shows.
These are some really good shows from back in the day.
Billy Idol with the Pressure Boys opening, local band, the Pressure Boys.
Really?
They had some great shows there, and I feel like they don't really have music in there so much anymore. I think sure why.
At this point, at this point, things have kind of gone to specific venues. I mean, I know Prince played at the Smith Center back in the 80s.
Now, the Smith Center was the site of an incredible show that was Neil Young with Sonic Youth and Social Distortion opening at the Smith Center. And that was maybe the only, I know a lot of shows happened there, but that was maybe the only concert that I saw at the Smith Center. And that was a really cool night with those bands. But Cameron, Reynolds, I saw Van Halen at Reynolds on the Diver Down tour. So I think I've seen shows in all the local arenas. Oh, I saw the Clash. I saw the Talking Heads at Carmichael on the Speaking in Tongues tour, when the tour they were filming Stop Making Sense.
Yeah.
They played at Carmichael. That was amazing. I saw the Clash at Carmichael. So all these arenas had shows in the day. I just don't feel like they have that many anymore.
It doesn't happen anymore. You're going to be at Red Hat. You're going to be at PNC Arena. You're going to probably be at a football stadium for some of the larger shows. I was going to say the only show I ever saw at Reynolds Coliseum was a Beck tour when they came through in the late 90s. So hold on.
I was at that. I saw that.
Okay, you're at that show? Okay, yeah. So I'm having a hard time processing Van Halen in shoebox that is Reynolds Coliseum.
Yeah. It was packed.
I bet it was.
It was packed.
I bet it was. And where were you in relation to the show? Were you up front? You hang in the back? What do you do?
I was probably like halfway back.
Okay.
For that Van Halen.
As I mentioned, this podcast was recorded before the final Mike Krzyzewski home game at Cameron Indoor Stadium and before that meeting in the Final Four between Duke and North Carolina. Maybe when Superchunk isn't on tour, we can process what he watched. Big thanks again to Mac from Superchunk.
A brief history of Triangle Sports, sponsored by Copiers Plus, your local office equipment and solutions provider. Take the mystery out of your printing expenses by scheduling your free print audit today at copiers-plus.com.